All right, Chaz, let's get right to it. We talked about it for weeks. You run different scenarios in your head, and we all told ourselves if the Reds could just hang within a couple of games of the Mets, then you've got them head to head. You've got them at home. You've got them right where you want them, is what we all thought. But the math changed for the Reds when they lost a bunch of games in late August, and the Reds didn't get the sweep against the Mets at Great American Ballpark. They didn't make their move in that September series that we looked forward to for so long against the Mets. Now, the old saying is, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, and it's not. They did well in that series just to win those 2 games. But speaking of moves, is there still a move to be made for Terry Francona's team that could get them back in the race with now fewer than 20 games to go?
There were some good things that they showed as they took the series against the Mets, but it's still not a team that's quite feeling like it's getting hot. And it would obviously take the type of run that the Reds haven't had all season, that they haven't had since 2023, the type of run that, would require the bats getting completely hot and the rotation showing the entirety of its upside and the bullpen firing on all cylinders. We're just not seeing that right now, but there are still some good pieces that you saw as they took the series.
It's kind of been the story of the season, right? In that just when you think you don't see enough, the Reds show some things, and just when you see some things you think might be sustainable, some of those things fade somewhat into the background, into the distance, and things change. But the old saying, as long as you've got games on the schedule and you're not mathematically eliminated, there's a chance, and there's still some exciting things I think that could happen for this team. But it's going to take some work and some things to happen given how the homestand, the 9 games at home, played out. And, it took a white-knuckle 9th inning on Sunday just to survive against Juan Soto and the Mets to get 2 of 3 in that series. But we're going to talk about this later in the show. The way Hunter Green threw on Sunday just reinforces what we've said all season long, that if the Reds are going to win and if they're going to stay in the conversation, they're going to do that with pitching. But can they get enough of those guys, as you said, can they get enough of those guys right down the stretch to pitch their way back into a tighter wild card contention and wild card race? Welcome to Power Stacks, proud members of the Growler Podcast Network. Coming up on the show, it's the one that got away, right? I mean, the Reds have had more than a few of those this season, but we dig deeper into the 9th inning, bases loaded, no outs, and no runs finish against the Mets on Friday. Also, speaking of finish, let's finish what we started, Chaz, okay? The conversation on the last show about the role the home run plays in the Reds' offensive attack. That sent Chaz and his notebook on a search for more answers in the Reds clubhouse. We'll see what he found out. And they say father knows best. So what does Salvador Stewart know, and what does he share about his son Sal and the other sport that had the head start on Sal before he found baseball? That's on the way. But we start, as we always do, with the leadoff spot. So, Chaz, first of all, the fact that the Reds took 2 of 3 from the Mets in that series is actually pretty big, given the gut punch that Friday's series opener was at Great American Ballpark. But what stood out to you about the Reds' opportunity and then the opportunity they lost in that game Friday against the Mets?
Yeah, assuming the Reds don't make the playoffs, Friday's loss probably will be the first game that I think of when I think back on the 2025 season as a whole and opportunities lost. You should start with Andrew Abbott, a guy who has now scuffled in a few of these starts, who's talked about timing, mechanics, command, mistake pitches. Terry Francona said the stuff looks fine, but it's now another season where later in the year, Abbott isn't quite as firing on all systems go and just as sharp as he has been. And then there's the Ellie De La Cruz side of this too. We all know he kept the bat on his shoulders. We all know he has 1 home run since the start of July. I think you're seeing, and the talk started to be the quad maybe impacting how deep he's able to dig for some of that power You're seeing the strikeouts start to tick up. You're seeing, not in terms of chasing pitches out of the zone, but you're seeing kind of start to chase results in that way and try to do this, but leave himself vulnerable to that. And then try to address that, but leave himself vulnerable to this. He's still taking his doubles. He still had some nice at bats. He's still showing some nice exit velocities, but the pieces just aren't all together at a pivotal time for the Reds. And that's a big story of the season in terms of where they've come up a bit short.
Let's pick that at bat apart just a little bit. So the ninth inning, you need 1 run to tie. You need 1 to tie and 2 to walk it off against the Mets to kick off that series. The Reds battle their way back. They load the bases on a single and 2 walks against Edwin Diaz with 1 out. Noelvi Marte strikes out. So here's another part of the story is the Reds had exactly what they wanted to end that game. Base runners and your best bats in the batter's box. So Noelvi Marte strikes out. And then De La Cruz, and you said this to start, this was a 5-pitch at bat. Pitch by pitch. Let's talk about what he saw. And again, the fact that he never even got a swing off when a ground ball, pretty much any contact is going to give you a good chance to tie the game.
He saw, I believe, 1 slider and 2 fastballs over the course of that plate appearance that were right over the heart of the plate. This has been a
slider
theme.
first, yes. And then all fastballs.
This has been a theme that I've written about a few times this year, is just the Reds' inability to capitalize on mistake pitches has been one of the defining categories of the offense, and how it hasn't been able to tap into all of that power, not all of that power, but the power that it does have this season. Because to showcase that for a group that doesn't have an Aaron Judge, when you get a fastball right down the middle, that's it. That's when you've got to win. And that was another example where Ellie had the pitch to hit, and you've seen it, not just him, but a lot of guys on this team not be able to capitalize. And Ellie too, like, a part of the story of his season has been, he's seeing, I believe, the most breaking balls in terms of percentage in all of baseball since the All-Star break. And that's a reflection of the lack of protection behind him in the lineup. Like, the Reds need a better cleanup hitter to kind of scare pitchers into throwing more fastballs to Ellie. But Ellie got those fastballs here from Edwin Diaz. This was just about Ellie.
Yeah. And then going back to Andrew Abbott, you asked Terry Francona specifically about his stuff, and he related to you that he asked DJ the same question. Where did that conversation go?
So Derek Johnson said that the stuff was fine and the stuff was holding up. But what it really has felt like is at this point of the season, but what it really has felt like is the command and the mechanics, and there's just something that he's doing at 90% instead of 100% based on where he is at this point of the season. And I mean, we've talked about this at length on multiple shows when Abbott was humming how what this season was always about for him was August and September, and about the real, tangible, significant changes he made to be at his best. I think that's part of what's made this stretch so frustrating for him, is this is the goal he set, and he's just not getting there.
And this is not, the one thing that came out as well about this homestand, the entire homestand, is the sickness that went through the Reds clubhouse. And before anybody, flips this off, no, I don't mean flips this off like the finger flips this off. I mean, turns on to something else, listens to a different podcast, changes the channel, whatever you want to say. This is not an excuse, but Freddie Benavidez, when we talked to him at the end of the homestand, said, look, this was kind of a big deal. Not only did Freddie miss time and have to stay home, Terry Francona missed time, had to stay home. Nick Lodolo, Scott Barlow, other people on the clubhouse staff. That was what we knew. What we didn't know about whatever it was that made its way through the Reds clubhouse is there were a lot of guys who were sick. There were a lot of guys who were less than 100%, because Benavidez said to us, he said, look, there were guys who just had to play through it. There were guys who just did play through it. So each of these conversations we have about people who maybe didn't have their best performance, I've got that in the back of my head just as the human element, the human factor of all this, and the things that we don't know. Not making excuses, but I factor that into everything that I saw during this homestand, knowing that that was the case. And we've said before, your stars have to be your stars. And everybody has played hurt. Everybody has played sick before. But the Reds had some of those chances. And for whatever reason, The Stars didn't drag them across the finish line in that game the way that they had the opportunity to, but they did find a way to bounce back. They did find a way to win 2 games, and it revisits the theme for the Reds that we always said, if you have pitching, you have a chance. And when the Reds got pitching from Brady Singer and Hunter Green, they had a chance, and they were able to win those 2 games. We just haven't gotten as many of those performances across the board down the stretch that would allow the Reds to avoid the losing streak that they found late in the season.
That's the formula for a team that's just not
That's the
mashing.
formula.
It's those types of starts where the starting pitcher picks the team up and they're up there on the podium post game talking about how confident they're feeling. That's what they haven't had enough of for a pitching staff that this summer has been more solid than spectacular. And what they've needed spectacular. They did get maybe, I don't know. Green was spectacular. Singer was
Yeah, he
very,
was.
very strong. And there's a difference there, but Brady Singer has been exactly what the Reds were looking for. And I talked to him about this. Brady just knows what to do. Like, not to make this about Andrew Abbott, but look at the difference between how different pitchers evolve over the course of the season. Singer is just a well-oiled machine in terms of knowing exactly what he needs to operate at this point of the year. And it's funny, he's gone on this great stretch. This stretch started with a game where there was some, I believe it was described, forearm tightness that he was dealing with, August fatigue, whatever you want to say. There wasn't a set injury designation there, but that was a discussion with Brady Singer about 4 weeks ago. And to go from that to pitching his best baseball of the season, that's a skill. And then Hunter Green, it's so simple. Just the way he challenged those Stars with 101 and just said, go hit this, you can't. That's Hunter Green right there against one of the best lineups in baseball.
And Green did that in back-to-back starts against 2 incredible lineups, the Jays and the Mets. He looked pretty similar, had the big strikeout number against the Mets, tied his season best with 12. But going back to Brady Singer, just to give him a little bit of what he's very clearly due, what you talked about where this stretch started, that was one of his worst and shortest starts of the season. And it felt bad. And you could tell he was wearing it. And then he snapped out of it. So now the Reds have won 7 of his last 8 starts. He's having a career year in terms of wins. He has a career year in terms of wins. He's got the ERA back in the 3s based on this stretch of 8 starts that he's had the last month and a half or so. And Brady Singer, now, you can think of, how was the trade framed? Was he brought here to be the Reds' 4th starter, something like that? Brady Singer leads the Reds in starts, quality starts, wins, strikeouts, and fewest home runs allowed amongst the rotation that has made a similar number of starts. Obviously, Green's been on the shelf for a while and has a smaller number there, but the guys that he's made starts with, 25, 26, 27 starts, fewest home runs allowed for Brady Singer, and he's second in innings behind Nick Martinez, who's had a couple of outings out of the bullpen that's jumped that number up. But that's Brady Singer right now as we hit September. That's how important and how key he's been to this team.
You know who would desperately want Brady Singer? The Mets.
A lot of teams.
And that's a testament to it. It hasn't been flashy. It hasn't been pretty, but over the last month, it kind of has been flashy. And another example of a guy or a starter at this stage of the season leading the Reds to those types of wins that they've really needed.
Yeah. Brady Singer also leads the team in walks, and that's not great. And every time after every one of his starts, he says, even when it was really good, he goes, I didn't like the walks. That's something that he's fighting through, but he's managing that to one of the best stretches that we've seen from a Red starter at this point in the season in a long time. And that's good. And it just makes you think, if the Reds are able to either play some really, really everything's on the line regular season games down the stretch, or if they get in, you've got Hunter Green, you've got Nick Lodolo, you've got Brady Singer pitching the way he is, you've got Andrew Abbott with always the ability to go out and shut a team down, always. And that's the tantalizing thing about where they are right now. But also, if you allow yourself to think about building for this window the next couple of years, that's what keeps you coming back to thinking the Reds, have some things to work with, definitely, because in the past, when they've been on the fence, they haven't had pitching like this. They have pitching now.
And to go kind of in the weeds with it, but look at how they built this rotation. They've got Green, Lodolo, and of course Burns, premium picks who I feel, and you can talk about some injury stuff with Lodolo, but when and Green as well for that matter, but when they've been out there, are showcasing their elite talent, have been put in addition and have been put in a position to do so. In this rotation, you've got Andrew Abbott, who was sure a second round pick, but he had a lot of development and a lot of stuff he needed to learn how to do and grow with to kind of ramp up his stuff after joining the Reds organization. Abbott's a huge developmental success story when you look at it from a big picture perspective like that. Singer, an example of kind of some foresight from the front office. Player evaluation from another team, going hand in hand with a development plan. You look at what the Reds have done to kind of give Brady a third pitch that he had never had this season, and the way that he's kind of mixed in the fastball and the cutter at different points, like acquisition plus development with a veteran. And I know Littell he's had some ups, but he's certainly had his downs as well. Littell's another guy who a smart move from the front office to be able to, in theory, then move Martinez to the bullpen. A lot of different avenues here that the Reds have taken to build this pitching staff.
And I'm excited, and we don't know for sure yet, but I'm excited to see Chase Burns finish the season on the mound. And if you watched his 2 live batting practice sessions at Great American Ballpark, the second one was different than the first, because the second one they had some staff guys in the box because they didn't have a ton of hitters. But the first time, it was Will Benson, and I can't remember exactly. There were a couple other guys. Just watching him in the middle of the afternoon, with the cage up, there are all these things that should make it feel like less of a big deal for Chase Burns just to get out and throw and pitch. And you could just tell how locked he was. You could tell he was upset when guys made contact. That's how competitive he was in the live BP session. And I think he's going to get back. I mean, it feels like he's going to get back sometime soon. And I look forward to seeing him finish the season on the mound in some of those situations, because that's another thing that just makes you think, okay, there's something else really good that can happen. I traveled the bell. There it is again. Let's do Tito's take now. And on the last show, which we hope you listened or watched on the last show, the Reds are coming out of the Blue Jays series, and I'm talking about the Blue Jays lineup and just what that team did offensively at Great American Ballpark, and just crushed, just swung the bats, barreled balls, hit home runs, and that offensive display that they had. And that kind of took me down a path. It wasn't on the rundown. Just took us down a path of me saying, watching that team, I think they hit 11 home runs in the 3-game series at Great American Ballpark. And I shared that thought with you, and I started it. And as I started, you knew exactly where I was going when I said it just kind of reminds you or makes you think about the role that the home run has or hasn't played in the Reds' offensive attack this season. And if you were watching the YouTube, Chaz lit up. And we live for that reaction when we see that expression on Charlie Goldsmith's face. That's something, as you said, or you say sometimes, just kind of lights that fire. And what it did was it took your brain someplace that it had been before about this offensive philosophy, what role the home run plays, what it looks like now that a season, almost a whole season under their belts, doing and winning games and generating offense the way that they have. So that got you started. And I know that you took that question and that thought a little deeper this week into the Reds clubhouse. But before we get to that, let me just give you this. This is just the numbers. Here's the context and the background. The Reds are 24th of the 30 teams in baseball in home runs as a team this season. The only other team that's currently in a playoff position, now, there is one team that's in a playoff position that's in that bottom tier of home runs with the Reds, and this kind of surprised me. It's the Padres. The Padres have the second fewest home runs in baseball, and yet that's a playoff team. Back to the point about the Reds, 24 of 30 in home runs. What did your deeper dive this week answer for you or show you about the Reds?
This will sound like very too simple, but like they're not telling these guys to not hit homers. Um, and I think there's been some greater reflection too about the push and pull between the situational hitting emphasis and the impact that has on upside in a given inning. Because when you're moving the runner over, you're not hitting a homer. And it kind of goes back and forth there. Let's start here. Here's Terry Francona. I asked him some kind of an I don't know, maybe it wasn't interesting, but I wanted to make it as broad as possible. So I tried to frame the question like maybe my question wasn't interesting. I'm sorry, that's what I was saying. I was saying it was an interesting premise to a question, a very like general, broad framework for a question.
Don't sell
Um,
yourself short, Chaz.
my question was, what is the role of power in this offense?
I wish it had a bigger role. You know, we are who we are, so you can complain about it or you can try to win. Like, our goal during the season is to win and make it reach, even if sometimes it doesn't look like it might reach. That's what competing is. But when the season's over, then you can look up, okay, maybe here, whatever, but not now. Like, you know, the other night, we scored, 9 and 9. Theirs seemed a little easier, or they hit the ball a little further, but we still scored a bunch of runs. It's, your team is your team, and like I said, you try to take their strengths, maximize them, and take the weaknesses and minimize them. That's what managing is. Sometimes we're a little more successful than others. So.
There was some reflection there. Has this approach been just a product of the way this team was built and has been built? And of course, how this team mostly has been built has been through the draft and international free agency and player development, and then the selling trades in 2022. Then also how this team was built was the Ke'Bryan Hayes trade. And I think that was a very interesting philosophical moment for what they want this team to be. But then I even, talking to Chris Valleca about this, and I'll write about this at length this week, their message to Ke'Bryan Hayes has been get the ball in the air more. So he's a guy who actually is trying to hit more homers, and he has hit more homers than he previously has. But it's a very complex thing, this home run question that factors in player development, player acquisition, the approach at the big league level. Francona stressed, though, this is who we have, and that makes you wonder whether or not they are thinking more about getting that big power bat heading into 2026.
And going back to that interview, just it sounded like, if it sounded to you like we were trying to conceal the identity of Terry Francona and overmodulate his voice like you do in an interview, that's just how sick he was. He just did not sound well. That was not manipulated in any way. But as he was talking, I was thinking, it looks like we should just have the whole shadow for his face, and then we modulate his voice. Guy was just sick, and he wasn't the only one. But just like we said last time, I agree. We've seen home run dependent teams, and when you don't hit a home run, you strike out, and then everything just fizzles. I still appreciate the approach, and I think that's still a key to success for this team. But like you said, you can sprinkle in a couple of those power guys, and it makes everything else work better. It makes all of the approach, and it makes Ellie De La Cruz, makes all of those things better. And so I agree with you. That's a good place to start with where to go with this conversation. Anything else stand out to you about what you heard about hitting philosophy, or just hitting this time of year when guys are hurt and tired and all those things and the stakes are higher?
Well, here's a quote from Chris Valleca on Ellie De La Cruz. I'm not trying to pick this out of context, but I'll just read the line. Him dealing with some of that injury, the quad injury, is not letting him get into as much as into his legs as he has in the past. And you've got Steer, who's been banged up. You've got Andujar, who's been banged up and hasn't been playing as much. McLean looking good, but also just dealing with the grind of a long season. His power numbers maybe aren't, or certainly aren't at the level you expecting at the beginning of the year. TJ Friedel, long season, smaller guy, You can think of some of that as well with him. Austin Hayes been banged up a few times, also just gotten cold, and right-handed pitching has had a bit of an edge against him. That's where I see the power numbers starting to slip away from the Reds in the second half of this season.
All right. Speaking of power, that brings us to our Reds milestone moment of the week. This week's milestone moment is Sal Stewart with his first big league home run, his first big league extra base hit. He got the first hit and those things out of the way earlier in the series, and then he came up against rookie Jonah Tong and got one up in his eyes and put it out to center field. So welcome to the club, Sal Stewart. And you know, I've heard some guys with the Reds, and you hear this about young hitters all the time. As much as they've praised Sal Stewart's advanced approach as a hitter, I had somebody tell me this week, hey, he doesn't even know where his power is yet. He hit 20 home runs at 2 minor league levels and 34 doubles, I think, but he hadn't even found his power yet. So that's kind of an intriguing way to look at Sal Stewart as a hitter and his potential and his future. But that's our Reds milestone moment of the week. And that's also brought to you, as always, by Glenville Ave, our good friends who've been there at Glenville Ave for Power Stacks. Chaz, they make the baby blanket designed by parents who wanted something better. Milestone blankets. So as your baby grows and those life milestones and achievements happen, these blankets grow with them because they're bigger, they're softer, they're safer. You're going to want to keep those around, and that's what this blanket is. It's built to last, double stitched, so you can drag this around to the park and the playground, and it's going to hang in there just fine and just be a really useful thing for your child as your child grows and develops. So these are keepsakes. Keep that in mind. And you can find all this out at the website, GlenvilleAveLLC.com, GlenvilleAveLLC.com. They've been so pleased, the good folks at Glenville Ave, with the Power Stacks response that they've increased the offer. So if you go to the website and you pick something out, use the promo code STACKS, and they're going to give you 15% off your first order. That it used to be 10. Now it's 15% off. So do us a favor, go check out GlenvilleAveLLC.com, and we appreciate their support and hope you will support those who support the Power Stacks community. Time now for Charlie's Notebook, and that milestone moment about Sal Stewart takes us right into the notebook because Stewart said this week after his first big league hit and his debut and all that happened, we all saw the shot of his family in the stands. There's a little bit of all of us dads in Sal's dad who, enjoyed that moment, took that moment in. There were some tears shed. But post-game, Sal said, that moment is not for me. It's my first big league start. That's my first big league hit. But that moment was not for me. He was talking about his parents and his family, and he said it's for them. So, Chaz, you've spent some time with Sal and the family. What do we know about the Stewarts? What's that story?
These guys rock. They're full of energy. They're fired up. They were showing up in full force for the debut, and then they had like 20 more guys or more family and friends come for the weekend series, and they bring it. And you can see how Sal is Sal based on kind of the people he grew up around and how that shaped him. So I talked to Sal's dad, Salvador. Basically, I asked, how has Sal always been this way, and what does that do for him? Here's Salvador talking about his son.
I was sitting there yesterday, and it was just going through my head, like when he first started. Like I took him to baseball games. I had the players talk to him, and I had people do things for him. Then we went to travel ball, and it's just my mind, just the whole game was just thinking about all those years, So, and to see him there, it's undescribable. It's just surreal to see a young man at 21, getting there.
What was your coaching background?
Basketball. I kind of coached basketball for about 20 years. And then when he got into it with baseball, I took it kind of off. And
High school?
Yep. And that was my life is sports. And so I've been in all sports. I tell him all the time, he's the third best 3-point shooter in our family. I'm first, my brother's second, and he's like somewhere in the third place there. But
What were you like on the basketball court back in your day?
I can play a little bit, not a lot, but I can play a little bit. I can put my own, and I raced him, a basketball player. He broke his nose when he was 3 years old in the gym. He tripped and right into the bleachers. One time he fell from the stands and got hurt, and so he was just a basketball player all the way. So about 3 or 4 years old, we started doing baseball and basketball. And I realized I had a problem in my hands.
He broke his nose on the basketball court because he was going so hard.
He was going so hard. He was trying to get the ball and he tripped over and just face first into the bleachers. Just rushed to the hospital. And, you know what? It is what it is. Boys will be boys.
2 years old, you said? 2 crazy.
2 years old. I had to call mom and said, "Meet me at the hospital. Oh, we got a problem." So, and then I want to say when he was 4, maybe 5, we were at a game and he went to catch the ball or something and he flipped from the bleachers, landed, had a black eye, and his birthday was the next day. And I said to his mom that night, I was like, "Go to bed." And when he woke up in the morning, it wasn't a good right. But that toughness and that energy and that, that's just the way he is. If he doesn't play hard, he's not playing. So I don't expect anything less than.
If he doesn't play hard, he's not playing. And there's just, I don't know, chip on his shoulder's too cliche. I don't like even saying that because of how cliche that is. But he's just Sal Stewart. And now he's pulling the ball a little too much. I think you got to see him make a little bit of an adjustment, kind of take that next step in his growth as a hitter. Hasn't sprinted super 1,000,000% out of the gates like you saw like a Ellie De La Cruz or a Matt McClain. But he looks the part, and he's provided a spark, and his home run was huge on Saturday.
A spark, energy, we keep using words like that, but especially at this point in the season, and given the fact that the Reds lost some games, the spark and the energy is noticeable, and it helps. And speaking of Sal Stewart, the Reds start the week in San Diego, and so that means he gets to reunite with one of his mentors and family friends and Manny Machado. So it'll be interesting to see how that, I know we'll talk and hear from Sal and Machado sometime this week, but it certainly appears as we learn more and more about those relationships with Machado, Yonder Alonso, that those relationships are going to be a good part of Sal Stewart's story as he starts his big league career. So more on the Padres in just a bit. But right now we finish up the notebook with where the other big deal at the ballpark over the weekend besides the Mets series, and that was the only other person who refers to you as Chaz, aside from me on this podcast, is the Hall of Famer Marty Brennaman, who got his spot outside on Crosley Terrace, got his bronze sculpture, as we call them. And you had that ceremony out there. You had a ceremony on the field. And I'll just say this, people have different opinions about different things. The Reds do a really nice job of celebrating history. And that whole era or eras that went from Big Red Machine to the wire-to-wire team, all of that, which, multiple eras, multiple World Series runs, there was one guy that was the voice of all that. And that's not to say anything about anybody else who did the television broadcast or any of the other broadcasters, but there was one guy that had the World Series, that had the no-hitters, that had the perfect games, that had those moments. I like to say he was kind of the soundtrack to spring and summer for Reds country. That's Marty Brennaman on the radio. Any thoughts on seeing the Hall of Famer back and being honored the way that he was?
The moment from the unveiling that I'll stick with me the most was the cowboy in his speech was talking about growing up and listening to the radio. And that just instructed him and told him, this is how baseball sounds and feels. And I caught up with actually Cowboy later that night. And I said, what was so incredible is you were growing up, I believe, in Mississippi, and I was in Cincinnati. We both, however many years apart, we both had the same experience. Except I told Cowboy the one difference was you were also on the radio as I was listening. So that was one difference. But no, and that shows the impact and the cross-generational presence. And one more thing about Marty, like something that gets talked about a lot with my generation is we're like the last generation that got to experience the monoculture, like before, social media and algorithms made the content everyone consumes different for every single individual. We all just used to listen and watch the same things, and no one epitomizes that more than Marty. I've had so many conversations in my life about things that Marty said. Oh, did you hear this? Did you hear that? Marty said this. And just the way that was worked into the fabric of opinions in the city of Cincinnati goes to show how meaningful of a voice he was for so many people from so many backgrounds, from so many age ranges, across the region, across the country, like Marty Brennaman did.
There are things that we can all take from Marty and his career. All of us can take be yourself. All of us can take follow your passion. In the broadcasting world, you can take be honest. Players didn't always love Marty Brennaman, but at the end of the day, everyone on some level respects honesty, whether that's Chaz, whether that's what you write, what I say. You have to respect honesty at the end of the day if it's delivered and presented in a fair way. And that's what Marty was. He was never afraid to be honest, and he's still not. The thing that stuck with me from the weekend, aside from reliving a lot of those calls and a lot of the moments that he was in the booth for, was the fact that Marty was humbled. He was nervous by what he said and what those around him told me over the weekend. He was a little uncomfortable, but in all the best ways. But you just don't think, he's this big voice, this brash personality in your face. Sometimes he likes to give it. He can take it, but he'll give it. But he was humbled over the weekend with that honor, and it was great to see. So if you haven't seen it yet, I love the way that it's set up and this one belongs to the Reds on the wall above his sculpture. Go check that out at Crosley Terrace. Also, the fact that he's looking out towards Joe and Pete, the two guys that he was closest to from the Big Red Machine in that era. So kudos to the Reds and congrats to Marty and his family for that honor over the weekend. We finish up with what's next. What do you think about this series against the Padres? I'm just going to keep it simple. You got the Padres and you got the Reds. Just give me a couple of bullet point thoughts on where this could go this week.
I mean, talking to Tyler Stevenson before the Mets series, what he kept saying was these two series. So like a sweep against the Padres, I guess, could have the same impact as a sweep against the Mets would have had. That's why I'm not calling the Reds dead yet. But it's another example where let's see how much this pitching staff can carry them. Let's see how in games where they kind of have to use the second level of their bullpen against some really strong hitters, whether or not they're more up to the task than they've been in previous weeks. It's still the same themes. It's still the same topics. It's just a Reds team that has to execute them more consistently.
I would agree with that. So late nights in San Diego, then the road trip is the A's, and then St. Louis. It's the last big road trip. After this trip, there are only 3 games left, and that's when the Reds end the season in Milwaukee. So, you can make the case. We talked a lot about the last West Coast trip and what that meant. The stakes are even higher on this one. So we'll see where the story goes and what type of story the Reds author on this final road trip that starts in San Diego. All right, Chaz, appreciate it. I'll be looking for Charlie's chalkboard and some good work on Charlie's chalkboard, and then we'll do this again in a couple of days. Thanks for listening. You can do that anywhere you find your podcast. Check it out on the YouTube channel. And before we go, I almost got past my final note. Another great moment this weekend at the ballpark was someone came to the pregame set and said, Hey, Brian. I turned, I looked, and he goes, my name is Austin. I'm in the military, and I'm in Alaska. I'm stationed in Alaska. He said, I'm from Cincinnati, and listening to Power Stacks makes me feel like I'm back home. He said, thank you and Chaz for what you do. It makes me feel like I'm back home. So, Austin, first of all, thanks for your service. Thanks for stopping by and sharing that. Those are the things that mean a lot to us, and we hope more and more people get the word. So spread the word about the Stacks, and we'll see you next time.